This is a change from India's past. India has been the strong supporter. I remember conversing with Aung San Suu Kyi and her deceased husband, now deceased husband. At the time, before her getting the Peace Nobel, and at the time of the Nobel, she couldn't join us. We had a meeting in Harvard, but the husband did come with a message from us, and we did have correspondence. And I was very privileged that she asked for copies of my writing, and I was very privileged to be able to send it to them. And one of the things that he expressed was to thank how the government of India has been the one solid source of support. But now our thinking has become much narrower in some ways. The Chinese are making big inroads there, and somehow we have to compete them out, and therefore we are going to just overlook the fact. The largest and the most dynamic, and in some ways, I would say probably the most successful democracy in the world at the moment, in the sense that we have done something with our democracy, was seen to be completely unwilling to place the democracy card on the board. And I had the opportunity of writing a letter in the, I guess it came out in the Herald Tribune, with Desmond Tutu. I say I had the privilege. Frankly, it was Desmond Tutu who wrote the letter, and he asked me whether I'd co-sign it, and I did co-sign it. It was just to say how dreadful the situation in Burma is, and yet I think there is almost nothing concretely that being done which could change. I don't necessarily take the view that having have more sanction is the only way of doing it. There are all kinds of other more subtle things, which is not just forget the nature of politics, let me join and just do good business in Burma. It's a question of bringing a global perspective to bear in the world. Now, I think the reason why Indian voice is quite important is that we have ended up showing that there are many things that we couldn't do at least as well as other countries are doing in the world. And given the fact that we also have some commitment to some basic values, we can bear our new voice, we can bring our new voice to bear on those issues. Now, it's not a question, what I was mentioning here about Burma, is not a question of the IT sector as such, but it is a question of taking a global view. What is a global view? If you think about the IT sector, what does it flourish on? It flourishes on unrestricted information, which we try to make more efficient, more technically quick, available, and usable. It really turns on participation at the widest level. The inclusiveness, which was the main theme of my talk, I think Kiran Karnik played a part in encouraging me to go in that direction, as did Jerry Rao actually. The inclusiveness issue is not unrelated to the democracy issue either. So I think in some way the two of the main things, if you look at the principles that govern the IT sector, I think participation and democracy on one side, information and access on the other, are very major factors. And the lack of democracy, lack of a dictatorial government, has the feature of threatening each of them. Now, I think, despite all that, China has done very well, because in many ways it has not taken the kind of authoritarian position in terms of many of the details as the Burmese government has and many other countries have. But also, even in China, that issue is, as I think I mentioned, I think it wasn't in my main speech, but somewhere else, and this is the fourth speech I'm making today. I'm very beginning to get rather bored with my voice. But I think one of them I mentioned that I expect that issue of participation and indirectly speaking about democracy is likely to be more and more a strong factor. The Chinese, of course, basically take the view that they are very much in favor of democracy. It's not the multi-party democracy that they want. Now that raises a different kind of question, which we can engage in. Some of us might take the view, I certainly do, that multi-party is very central to democracy. But it's very important that at least there's no denial in China that democracy is something which they want. And increasingly, I think I did mention that in one of the talks, about, in particular in the context of the Chinese crisis in healthcare, the voice of critique coming very often from the intellectuals have increasingly played a part in influencing the government. And that, in a sense, of course, is a democratic influence. So I think in many ways, given the role of the IT sector, its resources, its intellectual resources, its financial resources, and its resources in the form of ability to take new initiative, it can make a big difference at a local level and a national level. And while I'm not suggesting that we should have any kind of Napoleonic pretensions about the global level, I think it's very important, given the nature of the IT sector, and indeed given the nature of India, that we don't forget the issue of global responsibility at every step that we proceed. It doesn't require us to take precipitate action. Very often the right course, right solution may well be not to do something but to stand there rather than trying to jump in and do something that may be wrong. But it's something that we have to think about all the time, and especially in a world that is as riven by misunderstanding, misinformation, suspicion, and nastiness within borders and across borders, and terrorism is just one side of that. This is a very central question where the IT sector, in my judgment, in the long run, will have increasingly a larger role, and a role that we have reason to support and celebrate. So with that, I'd like to stop, and maybe we could have some Q&A. Thank you.